Remain hopeful, but have our strategies in place. Good advice from Agnia at the end of that high-level conversation. Now, well, we've got one more session before the closing remarks at the end of this Global Outlook track today. And it's focusing on the future, and it's focusing on the future of the European Union. The topic of this high-level panel discussion is new reality, same old question, same old tale. Yeah, that's the question. New reality, same old tale. EU eastward enlargement in the context of the new European Commission, which has just been put in place. This session is organized in partnership with the Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation, and your moderator is a friend of mine. There he is, look at that. Benjamin Tallis, Director of the Democratic Strategy Initiative at the Zentrum Liberale Moderne in Berlin. Good to see you.
Very good. Good afternoon, everybody. Yep. So, same old story, different chairs. Good afternoon and welcome to this panel in the Global Outlook section of the conference today. EU Enlargement, New Reality, Same Old Story. My name's Benjamin Tallis, Director of the Democratic Strategy Initiative, a new think tank established in Berlin to develop the strategic culture and capacity that free societies need to work better together and win the systemic competition. I'm delighted to be joined today by three very distinguished guests to discuss this extremely interesting and important topic. I'm joined by Benjamin Haddad, who has recently been appointed as France's Minister for Europe, and I'm sure I join many around the room in congratulating Ben on that new role and wishing him the very best of luck in it. I'm joined also by Anna Lührmann, who is Minister of State for Europe and Climate in the German Federal Foreign Office, the Auswärtiges Amt, the other AA. And Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, who is the chair of the European Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament and a former Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine. So, the title of this panel, as announced, is EU Enlargement, New Reality, Same Old Story. But the new reality is what we've been talking about for the last 2 days here in Warsaw, and what we've been grappling with for the last 2.5 years. But to quickly recap, what is that old story? Well, there are two. There's the story of EU enlargement as a core process of the EU's creative approach to geopolitics, of the innovative extension of the sphere of integration that stood as a counterpoint to imperial spheres of influence, and which was a key mode of the EU's protective security approach that helped to transform structurally embedded conflict in Europe into mutually beneficial cooperation. And that model culminated in perhaps the greatest success of the European Union, its enlargement in 2004, the Eastern Enlargement, the mass-scale enlargement, but somewhat run out of steam after that. And our challenge today is to look at, in the new reality, how do we re-empower that model of enlargement that served Europeans so well? What is the role of the new Commission in that process? What is the role of the member states and of parliaments and governments of candidate countries? And to explore the geopolitical implications of enlargement as a process, the needs potentially for internal reform of the European Union to bring it about, and also to look at who are the actors who can drive that. And we know that Ursula von der Leyen, in her mission letter to Enlargement Commissioner Koss, said completing our union, or furthering the completion of our union, is a moral, geostrategic, and economic imperative. So, with that said, let me turn to our panelists. We're going to keep this short and sharp because we have 20 minutes before we open up to your questions. And let me go to you first, Ivanna. How does EU enlargement, particularly to Ukraine, strengthen the EU geopolitically and geoeconomically?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the whole possibility to listen into many discussions and drive some conclusions from there. I think the geopolitical tectonic change that has happened in Europe with the decision of opening up the negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, with speeding up or enhancing the whole process of engagement with Western Balkans, the political decision of candidate status to Georgia has created a new momentum that is going to help all of us to bring added value to the European Union. I do believe that European Union with Ukraine, with other candidate countries in, will be the strongest economy in the whole world. It will be much stronger geopolitically, also with its power of attraction towards the other regions in the world. And I think that security-wise, that is also going to be a much, much stronger union. So we are bringing in something from which all of the nations, I think, will benefit inside.
Thank you, Ivanna. Ben, surely this is the geopolitical opportunity of a generation, isn't it?
It is. I mean, look, it's no surprise that we're discussing this in Warsaw, and we've seen the incredible success, first, of the previous enlargement wave, which was really a reunification for a continent. After we had abandoned half of Europe behind the Iron Curtain, this kidnapped West, as the Franco-Czech novelist Milan Kundera used to call it, and now we have to prepare for the next wave. That's something that was reminded to us very starkly on February 24th, 2022, that we still have countries on the European continent, in Europe, that are not in our union. We think of Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, of course, we think of the Western Balkans. Now, this is going to be a long and very important process, I think. You know, when you look at accession to the European Union, it includes reform to the rule of law, fight against corruption, and the independent judiciary, freedom of speech, modern markets. And I say this because it is our responsibility, it's our security, as you mentioned, it's a geopolitical project to ensure stability on the European continent. It will be our responsibility as Europeans to accompany and to support our neighbors in this process towards the European Union, and to make sure that our union is ready for the next wave. But indeed, the best way to defend our values and defend stability on our continent will be to prepare for this next enlargement.
Absolutely. I mean, Anna, it seems like the political dream. You get to do well by doing good. And this strengthens us internally as well. Tell us more from yours and Germany's perspective. How does enlargement strengthen us?
Well, indeed, if we do it right, then enlargement will make us as EU stronger, just by creating more force, also a stronger internal market, a larger internal market. And it's very clear that now our security is also threatened not only by Russia, but also by the gray zones that we have in our middle, in the Western Balkans, and to our east, where we let actors such as Russia do their malicious activities. And I think if we enlarge as European Union, we manage to really enlarge the success story of peace and prosperity that we've created here over the last years, of freedom. But we have to do it right. We have to make sure, of course, that the candidate countries live up to the standards, particularly of the rule of law, so that we also ensure that we maintain to be a community of values and of freedom. And we also have to make sure that an enlarged EU really becomes a stronger EU by actually having a better capacity to act. Because I'm actually a bit afraid that what sometimes is a detour now in the European Union, or maybe can be solved by somebody drinking coffee at the right moment, that this will actually be a dead end if we are even more member states. So therefore, we need to also address the issue of the EU reforming itself.
Right, this is an interesting point. Ben, I'll come to you in just a second, because conditionality on candidates has always been a huge part of the accession process, and often that technocratic facade was used to hide political reluctance, and this contributed to the grey zone which we created for Ukraine. But you rightly pointed out that actually some of our current members have some issues, and we could look at election results in various countries recently and also worry about that. So is enlargement actually the chance to get the EU's own house in order? Ben?
Yeah, I really want to stress that I agree with what Anna just said. For a long time, and I can speak of France, but I think it's the case in many countries, there was this eternal debate between integration and enlargement. And I think we have to overcome this and actually do both. And see how we can reform our institutions, continue to integrate where we need to, when we need to make the decision-making process more agile, when we need to be able to project European power on the world stage, and continue the enlargement process, and actually make our European Union more agile, precisely to be able to welcome these new members. But at the same time, you were mentioning, whether it's a bureaucratic process or a political process. And I will say that for me, it's not so much a political process. It's not only a political decision. When I'm in some of the capitals of candidate countries and I'm asked to give a date, for example, for accession, I'm always very cautious because it's not primarily up to us. We will be there to accompany and to support the process, but it is up to the merit of these candidate countries and it's in their interest. I mean, this is precisely why these populations actually want to join the European Union, is precisely to be sure that these reforms, the rule of law, internal markets are robust enough. And so, we will follow this and support this process, but it's not just, pushing a button and making a political decision, is making sure that the legal process is there.
Right, and I think much like you said, deepening versus widening is a false opposition. Politics versus technocracy can be as well, but you do need the political will to carry you through. And Ivanna, I'm going to come to you on that in a second, because I think Ben's point that actually Ukrainians want these changes more than anyone, in the case of Ukraine, is really important. But Anna, Berlin has been one of the countries one of the capitals most keen on pushing a reform agenda in order to enable enlargement. Could you talk us through that a little more? Is reform necessary for enlargement?
I think it will help us to make sure that enlargement succeeds. No? And it's not only a view of sort of a government, but actually, when I talk to citizens in Germany, I often get asked the question, okay, but you talk about enlargement and we see that it might be beneficial, but how do you actually want to manage the EU when it's larger? How do you deal if countries don't adhere to the rule of law, like Hungary? How do you better deal with this? So I think we also need to maintain public support for enlargement, and for that it's also necessary that we have fulfill our reform agenda. And I think reform needs to come in two main areas. The most important one is the rule of law. I think we really clearly see that currently the EU is not, doesn't have the sufficient toolbox to actually address weakening of the rule of law in our own member states, and we need to get that in order before we take even more member states in. Thinking here of a reform of the Article 7 procedure, for instance, so that it's that the majority needed to actually withhold voting rights for members that gravely violate rule of law and other European values is lowered. I'm thinking also of using the conditionality, so the freezing of funds, more extensively, and in the area of other institutional reforms. Again, I think the agility is the key. No? If we want to have Europe as a strong actor also on the international stage, we cannot be blocked by single vetoes.
So call it strategic agency or strategic autonomy. Strategic agility is the new way we have to be thinking here. Ivanna, how do you feel when you hear these debates saying we need reform first? Is this a strategic misprioritization by European countries, or do you also understand the need?
Well, first of all, we would not, I think none of the candidate countries would like to become hostage to the unfinished business inside the EU. So we would hope that there is a understanding and prioritizing of this need to reform and the urgency of this need, because it is in the interest of the EU to become more efficient anyhow, irrespectively of whether we are coming in and when we are coming in. Or I hope that rather when we are coming in, right? That's one thing. Secondly, I think that incredibly important that this process of enlargement would sustain its credibility, because we've already seen in the Western Balkans, so what happens if countries, it takes years and decades for the countries to go on. It's difficult to sustain the interest of the people and the support of the people along this way, and we are risking that the Russian Federation and its allies, if I may say allies in those terms, will take advantage, and that we will see some of the rottening processes with regard to values and democratic aspirations of those countries, and they might become satellites of the Russian Federation. Right now, we are at the, we are so preoccupied with other things, objectively so, that we are losing the sight of the elections in Georgia. And I think that this is exactly one of those examples that might slip away, even though the geopolitical decision was taken when they were given the candidate status, which was extremely important. And one more thing. Anna was referring to values. I think right now, when we are talking about the whole change within the EU, we have to admit some of the countries have been trading off values for their immediate, short-sighted, so-called national interests. And we are still, you have still not found a efficient mechanism how to deal with those issues. If we are trading values for the prosperity and security, we will actually lose both values and prosperity and security. And this is something on what the political populists and are playing right now, of the fear that people are afraid of losing this prosperity and security, but they do not understand that they cannot be preserved if we are losing values.
Right, this is a false trade. Right. Those who give up values for convenience will end up eventually with neither, to paraphrase. Ben, do you think the approach proposed by the Czech presidency back in 2022, which has since been picked up by President von der Leyen, of having sectorally differentiated integration, so accelerated integration in sectors where progress is made, rather than doing integration as one big shot enlargement move, is this going to help marry this geopolitical imperative with speed necessary?
Well, that's also something actually that was supported by France, reforming the methodology of the enlargement. Because first, we have to recognize that if you look at the current candidates for accession, you have very different stages, and you have some accession processes that have stayed stuck for a while. So I think once we have that frank assessment, being able to have here a process that's more agile, where indeed some countries can integrate certain blocks, but at the same time, if you see that they're backsliding, for example, on the rule of law, on reforms, then you can take away some of these blocks, but that they can ease progressively into the European Union. I do think that's indeed some of the flexible response that we need to be able to adjust reforming the European Union and integrating new members.
Right, so operationalizing that agility that you mentioned before. Anna, is that something that Berlin looks on favorably as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good idea to make sure that this more for more idea actually is being implemented, but also the less for less. So if countries take steps backward, then also they should feel a response from the European Union and the citizens in particular. And I think particularly for the citizens in the countries of the Western Balkans, it's so critical to see that steps towards the EU actually bring immediate benefits. And that's also why we are so keen on the Berlin process, for instance, where we have a big summit this month, 10th anniversary, and we're trying to help the countries of the Western Balkans to integrate into a common regional market that will help them also then to integrate better into the European Union. And I think we need to also think about creative solutions of actually taking this also stepwise approach, but it needs to be always very clear that our common goal is full membership and that we're working towards that, so that it's not some sort of a second class whatever, but that really as soon as criteria are matched, we need to be ready, as we just heard, we as EU need to be ready for the candidate countries as soon as they fulfill the enlargement criteria.
Right, and that's such an important message to say there is no second-class membership. That's often been a feeling in Central Eastern Europe, in particular, understood as second-class Europeans having to prove themselves double. So it's very good that I think you deliver that message so loud and clear here. But behind all this lies that question of will and the question of vision. And of course, I think many of us might agree that that's the part of Helmut Schmidt's oeuvre that we could do well with retiring at this stage and embrace the vision thing. Do you think the new Commission has the necessary vision? And I'll come to Anna first, then Ben, and then Ivanna. So does the new Commission give us hope for actually squaring this geopolitical circle, and does it have the vision to do so?
Yes, I believe so. Also, by prioritizing security issues in Europe, now having also a defense commissioner, I think that's an excellent idea, because we need to work closer together. By also assigning the enlargement portfolio to someone who is really behind also Ukraine's accession to the EU, I think that's a very good sign. And also by prioritizing both competitiveness and the implementation of the Green Deal, because I think, in the end, what we need to show also to our citizens is that we as EU manage to guarantee prosperity and security. That's the whole deal of it, and security from Russia, but also security from the climate crisis, and security that we have an economic model that manages to produce growth also in a way that doesn't harm our climate further.
That sounds like the need for strategy to marry these things, Ben.
Yeah, I agree, and I would add to this, not only do I think we have the vision and we're asking the right questions, especially about competitiveness, but we don't really have a choice. When you look at the environment around us, you see foreign interference directly, first in our democracies, but also directly in our neighborhood in some of these candidate countries that we mentioned. We see the risk, the security risk for us of letting these gray zones, as Anna called them, unattended. Especially we've seen this with the Russian aggression on Ukraine, the full-scale invasion in 2022, but we see also areas of potential instability in other countries if we don't get fully engaged and involved. We see tomorrow the questions arising from the US election and whether the United States will continue to underwrite our security, which will have also an impact in these areas. So we do need to first get our house in order, especially in investing in our industrial sovereignty, investing in our common defense, in our competitiveness, and being much more engaged with our partners for accession.
Yes, and competitiveness implies that you understand you're in a competition. And this, Ivanna, I wonder, from your perspective, do you think EU Europeans currently have the necessary will to win?
We wish that we all were on the same wavelength. And I think that what's important to understand when someone is talking about, the necessary preparation for deterrence of the Russian Federation in the future, that we have a clear deadline, as it was mentioned here on this stage, in Europe for that preparation, I think the deadline is to actually make sure that we are winning on the territory of Ukraine, and we are making sure that Russia is defeated right there, so that it won't spill over with all the insecurities and threats necessarily with the military might towards European states, and that is critical. And maybe there is this understanding in the Commission, and I think there are two components in the new Commission. There is a continuity with the leadership, which is important. I think that Ursula von der Leyen has shown this commitment and understanding and open-mindedness to understand the challenges, and I think that the new Commission is actually reflecting that understanding, that she has been doing some lessons learned experience listening to Baltic states, as she was mentioning several years ago, that we should have listened to Baltics with regard to the threats and so on. And so maybe this is bringing us to that point. But in order to win and have the will to win, definitely the resources are desperately needed, and upscaling of all the efforts are still very much needed. And I think it also takes leadership and explanation to the people in Europe why this is important. Especially when populists and when are taking the lead, when far-right parties are taking the lead, when disinformation and hybrid warfare is ongoing inside of the societies. So it takes courage, it takes will, it takes a strategy. And I hope we are there, and it's not about old tales as it was written in our title of our panel.
Yes, as Jacques Delors famously once said, the key to European Union's success will be vision, heart, and strategic realism. And that combination is something I think we can see, and I say that as a neo-idealist. With that said, to avoid grey zones, to make sure we actually do what we can for European stability and security, serve our interests and commit the money that's needed to back up that will to win, we come to your comments and questions. Comments are okay, as well as questions, as long as they advance the discussion. Please keep them short. We will take a first round of 3. Please raise your hand and identify yourselves when you stand up to speak. Okay, we have a first question down here.
Thank you. My name is Clara Lindström. I'm from the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. I would love for you to comment a bit more on the security dimension of EU enlargement, because as was said, there is a war going on, and if Ukraine does not win the war, there is no Ukraine to be admitted to the European Union. So how can the enlargement process be made more conflict sensitive? How can the EU make credible security commitments? Or is the answer rather that there can be no EU enlargement without NATO enlargement? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question, and I'm sure one that's on people's minds. Is there another question we have in this first round? No, stunned into silence by the brilliance of the panel. Okay, good. So we're actually going to take this straight up then. Ivanna, first of all, then Ben and Anna, if you would like to contribute. No, I'm informed we do have one. Please,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben, for your remarks and the great moderation of the panel. I'd like to ask a question specifically to the guests from Germany and from France about how do you see the role of the Weimar Triangle as an engine actually to push Ukrainian integration with the EU, and if that's something also that the Polish presidency can really come into, because we've been discussing a lot about this in the last 2 days, and I think that this is one of the ways that a path of acceleration could be found. It would be great to hear your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're from the Pulaski Foundation.
I'm sorry, Marcin Bluzanski. Yes, I'm with the Pulaski Foundation and Center for Diplomacy here in Warsaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's take those two as our first round. Ben first, one was addressed to you, and then Anna to you, and then Ivanna, I'd like to have your comments as well. Ben, please.
Sure. On the Weimar Triangle, we actually had a Weimar meeting with Adam just earlier, and I think it's a great engine. I think it's a great motor for thinking about the future of the European Union. And of course, very soon we have the Polish presidency of the European Council that we're very much looking forward to and engaging with Poland on this, and to think about the enlargement. We've actually had some conversations about Ukraine, and you went to Kyiv with Adam actually quite recently, about Georgia and the Western Balkans. So I think if we speak with a united voice, of course that gives so much clout. So there's a lot of eagerness clearly on the French, and I'll let Anna answer, but I think I can answer for you too on the German side for engaging on this. And just quickly on the question of victory in Ukraine, I actually don't see a contradiction in your question, because first we need to help Ukraine militarily win this war, but in the definition of victory is not just territorial integrity. It is about Ukraine choosing freely its democratic, political, geopolitical orientation. So yes, EU accession and NATO accession, very strong security guarantees, are part of this, are part of how we think about winning. And I'd just like to just piggyback very briefly on the question of winning, because there's been so much doom and gloom about us and about Europe in the last few months, if not few years, and we talk about foreign interference and foreign actors pushing back against us and loss of competitiveness. But having that conversation about enlargement reminds us that even if it takes a long time, even if it's a complicated process, there are populations at our door that are knocking on the door because they still see our model as an aspiration, as the dream of a better future, of a democratic and free future. And that should give us a little more confidence in our model.
Yeah, someone in Czech Republic put it very well once, saying, sometimes we're too stupid to realize we're being told we're beautiful. And I think we could draw more strength from that. Anna, NATO enlargement as well as EU enlargement. Where's Berlin on support for Ukraine's NATO membership?
No, thank you for the question, and I fully agree that what we need to talk about is very credible security guarantees for Ukraine. I mean, that's that's clear that that's the only way how this war can end. We're working very hard on this issue of EU membership. And we've actually used the Weimar Triangle quite frequently for this. We've had frequent meetings together with Olga Stefanishyna, who attended our meetings. She invited us also to go to Odessa now in July. And that was really quite a remarkable meeting for us, because we could really see again firsthand what it means to be under this brutal attack. And I think it's very important for us also as politicians to be able to come back to our own countries and say, look, this is a country under brutal attack. And it's very clear that if you want to talk about peace, the question is to the aggressor, to Putin, to stop his aggression, and not to Ukraine to put down the weapons to defend themselves. And I sometimes really don't understand how we manage now in many of our countries, and particularly in Germany, to actually, that their narrative has evolved in the public debate that is like a synonym of peace and Putin. And the opposite is true. So I think we also need to make that clearer.
Right, and this would be a false peace on Putin's terms. It would be unstable. It would be exactly the grey zone that Kurt Volker said is a green light for a dictator. And so, Ivanna, what kind of credible security guarantee would you like to see?
You know, I've been on the file on NATO membership since 1997, so I still believe in that. I don't think that there is any other security guarantee for Ukraine rather than being part of NATO. And moreover, I think that there is no other security guarantee for sustainable and lasting peace in Europe after Ukrainian victory, having Ukraine in NATO. Because otherwise, with all due respect, with all the gratitude for all the memorandums and security arrangement agreements, whatever they are called, that have been signed with many, like 30 countries, I do not believe in the security compact, because it does not provide you with any security guarantee. It just gives you a promise, which is very important, of support if Ukraine is attacked. That is not enough. We've been there with the Budapest Memorandum, with the assurances. We've learned the hard way our lesson, and that's why I think it's critically strange to speak about the possibility of Ukraine not winning, because it's not Ukraine not winning. It is the West not winning. It is the West losing. It is the EU and NATO losing, not being able to help the country that has chosen that wants to choose its own path, that wants to choose democracy, prosperity, development, security, that we failed altogether. And if we fail altogether, that means a much more insecure world. And I'm not sure that we are not then looking into a very serious, hot, not hybrid war on the territory of EU countries.
Right, that's a big fear. And if the EU wants to not only talk the language of power, but actually walk the walk properly, we need to have that credible security guarantee that can then underpin EU enlargement and a future that Ukrainians can believe in and that would actually demonstrate the EU's strength to the world. We have limited time, but I do want to push on this just a little bit. So we know, Ben, we were in Bratislava together when President Macron gave his Bratislava agenda speech and was challenged to back NATO membership for Ukraine, and then did it subsequently. Poland backs NATO membership for Ukraine. Can we expect, Anna, to see a common Weimar Triangle position on that?
Well, this is certainly a topic that that needs to be further discussed, and these discussions, of course, happen in the Weimar Triangle is one of the key places. For me, it's very clear we need to work towards Ukrainian victory. That's obvious. We need to make sure that Putin understands that with military aggression, he will not achieve anything in Europe, not in Ukraine, not in any other European country, and we need to go down that road. And the question of sort of this concrete question of how credible security guarantees look like, I think that's also a question that needs to be discussed, but where we don't have a very sort of clear position on how exactly they should look like, because also there are very different options on the table at the moment that I think in the process of a future also peace conferences and such will have to be discussed, but they need to be ironclad and very credible.
I couldn't agree more. Final words, 30 seconds each to you, Ivanna, and then Ben. So Ivanna, last message.
Ironclad security guarantees NATO membership for Ukraine, and I really hope that we will all get together to that point, that helping Ukraine to win now, giving Ukraine the prospect of European Union membership is already also helping Ukraine, but then making sure that we are all into, again, business of prosperity and development that is getting Ukraine in both institutions. Merit-based approach, totally merit-based approach.
Thank you. Ben.
Not much to add, but I'm glad that you mentioned the Bratislava speech that the president gave, and I think that's really very high on our agenda, re-engaging with partners that maybe we should have listened to more carefully for a long time when it comes to Russia, when it comes to a lot of appreciation of the threat assessment, and rethinking also our engagement with candidate countries.
Absolutely, and we see the power of rhetoric to change things there, to recognize, to change the strategic dialogue, to change the political conditions under which implementation can be achieved. We saw that also on the 27th of February 2022, not necessarily in Berlin, but in Brussels, where Ursula von der Leyen changed 2 decades of EU policy on Ukraine in 2 sentences by saying they are one of us and they belong with us. Now, the challenge for all of us is to go from should to did. And with that, I wrap up this panel. Please join me in thanking our excellent guests for this discussion today. Thank you. And I have the great pleasure of welcoming on stage Conference Director Professor Katarzyna Pisarska for a surprise announcement. Katarzyna.
Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to thank the panelists. This was terrific. I think it really wrapped up everything we talked about in those 2 days. Most importantly, how Ukrainian victory is critical for the success of the West in the future, and how everything we do should have that Ukrainian victory in mind. And that means, of course, strengthening Europe, strengthening our European defense capabilities, and strengthening our transatlantic alliance with the United States, regardless of what happens in a month. Let me stress that. But with that, I just wanted to ask to join me for just a second, Ben Haddad here on the stage, because on the one side, of course, I want already to invite you for the next year's Warsaw Security Forum. The dates are already announced, the 30th of September and the 1st of October 2025. And there is a reason, I think, that Ben, apart from the fact he's a wonderful, friend of Poland, has this Polish French flag on his chest, and he'll tell you more in just a second. Ben.
Well, thank you, Kasia. First, it's really such a pleasure to be here. I have to say, I think my first time was 10 years ago here at the Warsaw Security Forum, and if I'm being honest, at the time there wasn't so many French voices at the forum, and we've seen such great re-engagement in Poland, in the region, in the last few years. And so I don't know if you want to announce, or I should announce that.
You should announce. That is your announcement.
Okay,
that is
great.
not for me to make.
I'm very glad, actually. Probably my first announcement as a Europe Minister of France is that we will be the partner country for the Warsaw Security Forum in 2025. Which we're very proud. And I just want to